All righty. I want to welcome everybody tonight. Tonight's subject, as you know, is the Three Kids Mine. But do have a couple of things to announce ahead of time, nothing major. Just want to let you know this is our last Henderson Speaks for this part of the year. We are going to go dark during the summer. I don't know why. This year, it's going to be such a nice balmy summer. We know that it's going to be in the 70s, nice breezes, all of that. Probably rain all summer long. I'm sure it'll never reach 100 here, just like a normal summer in southern Nevada. But we are going to be back in business in the fall, so be looking for that. We'll be doing Henderson Speaks again in the fall. And so we will be announcing a new slate of talks at that time, probably dealing with, among other things, the 75th anniversary of the Henderson District Public Libraries, something that is a very important part of our history here. But before I get started, I want to have you come up and speak about something that's going to be for sale starting in July.
Does this work? We don't know if this works. I can talk really loud, though.
I think it's working, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Anyway, this is the commercial, folks.
Absolutely.
The Henderson Historical Society license plate. The Henderson license plate is for the City of Henderson. Our partners are the City of Henderson and the Henderson Chamber of Commerce. But the Henderson Historical Society, we sponsor the plates, so we get all of the proceeds from the plates. This would be a wonderful way for you to support the Henderson Historical Society. These are, in fact, the plates. They're very beautiful. Henderson, a place to call home. They look great on any color car, I can guarantee you that. You can get them anytime. Don't even wait for your car license to expire. Just go on down and you can buy these plates. They're available now. The other thing, and as of July, we will also be selling souvenir plates, and they look like this. Don't put one with red on your car, or I think you get pulled over. These are not real plates. But you can, 1953 is Henderson's birthday, so that's why that's that way. But you can also get them personalized. They will be available after July on the Henderson Historical Society website. So look for those, buy those plates, but for sure, put one of these on your car. Thank you.
And they do look good on red cars because I have a red van and I have mine on my car already. So they look good already. So you all know about the Three Kids Mine, right? You know where it's at? Out there off the highway heading out to Lake Mead. The Three Kids Mine was manganese mine. It was, they were taking manganese out of there in World War I. They were taking manganese out of there in World War II. They shut it down and then they reopened it in the early 1950s and took manganese out of there through 1960. It was an active manganese mine all the way through there. Now remember, that's manganese, not magnesium. This is not BMI. This is not what came into BMI. It's two separate things. One of the interesting things about southern Nevada and about Clark County is it's one of the most heavily mineralized counties in Nevada. We mine just about everything here at one point or another. It's one of the interesting things when you look at our history. It's one of only 2 counties in the United States where people mined platinum at one point and actually made money at it. But we mined manganese all the way back to World War I. But we're very lucky tonight that we have 2 people that actually worked out there at the mine when it was going, and I've had the opportunity to sit and listen to them talking. And they've got great stories about what it was like to be out there. Not necessarily altogether pleasant at times. The air conditioning apparently didn't always work. Then, as we have Richard Millick, Basic high school, class of 53, or 58, I'm sorry, I'm making you older than you are. Didn't mean to do that. Don Wilson, basic high school, class of 57. And then Mike King, who is going to talk about, he didn't work out there. He he was the one of the actors in a run at an idea for I believe it was a movie, right? Not a television show?
TV show.
TV show idea. For Vegas, for Dantana. Yeah. Ah, okay. I have to remember which one it was. I always loved Dantana. I always loved that show. If you could make a left turn on Fremont Street and be at McCarran. I always liked that about Vegas. But he's going to show some photographs from when he was hiking out there, and his father was doing some writing and some ideas for a show for Vegas. But first, we're going to start with Richard and ask him to talk about his memories of working at the plant.
Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Millick. I worked there in the summer of 1959. I was going to school up at the University of Nevada, Reno, and got this as a summertime job. And when I was there, what I did, which was to me quite interesting, I was working for Isbell Construction, who was doing the mining for the Three Kids mine. And it was highly unionized. So because of that, and I was summertime, what ended up happening was I couldn't stay on one particular job too long, because if I did, one of the union guys, would complain to the union and say, "Why do you have this kid here? We want a full-time union operator doing that particular job." So because of that, I ended up doing just about every job there was out there on that mine at one time or another, keeping everybody happy with me bouncing around, from one job to another. So it worked out pretty good. Plus the fact that I ended up doing, like I said, almost every position out there. About the only two things that I didn't really do was, they had those big Tonka toy trucks, those big Euclids. I drove them, but not actually from the mine to the Grizzly, dumping the ore, because that was totally union. What I would do was drive them back and forth from the pit or wherever to pick it up and take it to the maintenance shop, and which would be oil, everything that was involved in maintaining that truck and then driving it back. Plus, I didn't operate that big electric shovel that was out there. And that shovel, gosh, I wish we had a picture of that thing. That thing was monstrous, just huge. You couldn't believe. And like I said, it was electric, and it was run on a cable that was, everybody can see, it was at least about that thick. And what it was rubber encased with copper cable running through it. And that stuff was so heavy that one person could only pick up and drag maybe 5 feet of it. So everybody that we could get a hold of would have to pick that thing up and drag it, when we moved that shovel. And even then, every now and then, the cable was so heavy that it would break on itself. So we'd have to take out a particular segment of that and run it back over to the shop and repair that. And once again, with me doing all these various jobs, I got into doing that. Attaching the cable back and then vulcanizing the rubber around it and so on. Probably the worst job that I had out there was powder helper, where we were just starting that last pit that I guess you can see on YouTube. You know, it's quite narrow and quite deep. When I started on that, when I was there, it was just desert. It was just almost flat desert. You know, they hadn't even begun digging that thing. One of my jobs was carrying those 95-pound sacks of ammonium nitrate to the drill holes where we would blast, you know, the overburden, trying to get rid of that before we got down to the ore. That wasn't fun, because you can imagine how hot it was. And like I said, lugging those 95-pound sacks was totally not fun. The only other thing that was bad that I remember about the whole job was, once again, in that powder, we were transporting dynamite. And the dynamite that we transported was so old that the nitroglycerin had coagulated, seeped out of the stuffing, sawdust, whatever it was, into pockets, and was deemed unsafe. Well, we had it on the dig site, and we had to get rid of it. We had to get it out of there. So we put it in a pickup and drove it back on this road that wasn't even a road. All it was a one track from a D8 shovel that had just put their blade down and ran it down to, you know, the construction area. Bumps, everything. And here we've got that nitroglycerin dynamite in the back. The foreman found out about it, and he had a cow. He said, a 19-year-old kid, and you got him out there in that pickup, you know, what the hell are you thinking, type of thing. So that, you know, that, like I said, that was dangerous, and even I knew that type of thing. But outside of that, it was a good job. I loved every minute of it. In fact, I told a story. There was one other kid out there at the time from Boulder City, a kid by the name of Bill Kendricks, who was doing the exact same that I was doing. He was, I was going to UNR. He was going to Arizona State. He was a heck of an athlete. But anyway, we finished up our job. I don't know what we were doing, but anyway, the hydro pit that I guess is still down there. I haven't been out there in years, but about a third of the way down in that hydro pit was water. It was just pure water. So we came up with the bright idea that we went ahead and stopped right there at the edge of the hydro pit, and there were boulders all around it. We started trying to push boulders and hit the water down there, which was tough because you had all those safety ledges and, you know, driving ledges and everything else before you could get it down there to the water. We probably pushed off 30 boulders, and I think we hit the water once. But anyway, the foreman was driving by, and all of a sudden here he saw us, what we were doing. He slams on the brakes, and he just boils out of the truck, and he just goes into a 2-minute tirade. How dare you? Don't you know that I'm giving you kids a favor, giving you a job? You know, just on and on and on. How could you stab me in the back like this? After he got through his whole raving rant, he said, "You done it? Did you do any good? Here's a boulder over here. Let's." So the three of us, me and Bill and the foreman, were out there pushing that boulder, trying to hit the water off of that hydrant. So it was a fun job. One thing, you know, I think we're probably just sticking with the Three Kids Mine. I've got probably even more tales to tell about Manganese, because the following year I worked at Manganese. Okay, one thing I wanted to mention, the settling ponds, those big round settling ponds that are out there. One of them has been painted to a Wheel of Fortune, it looks like. There's all sorts of graffiti out there. I remember I was 20, I think, well, maybe possibly 21. My birthday's in July. But anyway, I was working graveyard, and Manganese had shut down for repairs. And they were shut down probably for 4 or 5 days, around in there someplace, getting everything squared away before we started running ore again, running product. Anyway, here I was working graveyard, and I was working Friday and Saturday, once again on graveyard, and I had to go up there to those round settling ponds with a fire hose and hose the manganese, the dried, everything that were in those settling ponds down to get them, into the system. Well, it was a Friday night and a Saturday night, and I remember because the parties of the century were going on in Las Vegas on Friday night and Saturday night. And those ponds are high enough and there's a dip in between the hills where when you're standing there, you can see the lights of Las Vegas just spread out in front of you. I remember, 1 o'clock in the morning with my fire hose going there and looking out at those bright lights of Las Vegas thinking I'm missing the parties of the century. So those settling ponds are no friends of mine. But that following year, I did, instead of working for Isbell, I worked for Manganese Incorporated. And I was one of the 3, we worked 24 hours. I was one of the 3 cooler kiln operators. And what it was that when the powder, the calcine, was roasted and gotten rid of not only the moisture, but then it separated the various, there was a couple of byproducts that were coming besides the manganese. Anyway, the byproducts would come out of there, and then it would drop down into what was called a nodule kiln. And that nodule kiln would take that dust and turn it into a nodule just about my pinky finger, about that size. And then once it had done that, and it was, hundreds upon hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit, it would drop into what was called a cooler kiln, which ran blowing hot air, or cooled air, just regular air, trying to cool it off, and then it would drop down into a pit where there was a conveyor belt with troughs. It wasn't rubber. It was troughs with like big bicycle chains that ran it up with water. I had spraying water on that, cooling it off as far as we could go, and then it would drop, these nodules would drop down into an actual rubber conveyor belt that ran perpendicular to the highway with a big stack on the thing. And what we would do is, whatever stack they wanted that particular day, I would go ahead and put that stack there, and it would fall down into a mound. From there, by the way, it was still a very low-grade manganese and wouldn't come up to the specifications of the United States who we were selling it to. So it went from us, it was trucked into here into Henderson, just past the plants. There was a railhead there. They would load that up, and it was sent to Accurant, Ohio, where those nods, it was all refined one last time to get it up to standards for the United States to accept it. So, and speaking of that's where the demise of the whole thing happened, because that year in '61, they discovered very, very high-grade manganese in Australia. And we were processing merrily away, and then all of a sudden one day, the government told Howe Sound, who was the owner of Manganese, that they didn't want any more manganese. So, come to find out that that manganese that was found and processed there in Australia was being shipped up to the United States, and the government, the United States, was buying it from them at a lot less cost than what we were doing. And the suits, of course, went to Washington from Howe Sound and said, you can't do that. You know, we've got a signed contract and we've got a signed agreement with you, the United States government, which is good for another, so many years and so many tons and everything. And the government said, sue us. So, that was the abrupt end of manganese. Probably the only good thing that I remember about that is that when it happened, WECO, Western Electrical Chemical Company, which was one of the plants, down there in the plant complex, was hiring, and they had an open call for any operator that was there at Manganese. If you could pass that crooked bat X-ray that. I don't know what it's all about, but anyway, you have to go get X-rayed, and if your back isn't crooked, you're hired. Well, I worked at Manganese one day, and the next day I was at WECO, so that worked out. But manganese was completely about the only thing about both the Three Kids mine and Manganese was how dirty it was, and I do mean dirty. That black manganese was just so horrid. It was so fine that it would get into your pores. And both places, both the Three Kids mine and both Manganese had change rooms, shower rooms and change rooms. So once you got off your shift, and I mean you just be black, just pitch black, you'd go in and take a shower, and they had buckets of Tide laundry soap to wash with. Anyway, you'd go ahead and get yourself cleaned off completely and then put your street clothes on and then go outside here you are, nice, fresh clothes, everything else. You'd go outside into that 110, 115 degree temperature, and you'd automatically perspire. Every bit of that manganese was so fine that it got into your pores. The first time that you sweat, it all came out, and your beautiful street clothes were just pitch black. So it was, it was just an absolute nightmare when it came to that. But oh gosh, what else? Funny story. I won't name names because he might still have family here in town. But picture this: the calcine kiln, which I mentioned before. When the flotation plant had done its thing, and the ore in liquid form came over to that calcine plant to roast it. The operator was this guy who was the laziest guy I've ever run into in my life, and I can prove it. He chewed tobacco. He loved the idea of a big old plug of tobacco on one side. Day's work, it was called, day's work tobacco. Anyway, he loved to read, and he would sit way back in a chair, almost like a Chase Lounge type of thing. He went to the workshop there at Manganese and found a piece of air conditioning type of tin, for ducts, and he took a piece about like this, and on one end he made he cut it circular, and then the sides he folded up to 90-degree angles, so it looked it looked like that, down to a narrow ending, circular on this end and then a narrow ending on this. He would read on that chair like a Chase lounge, and he'd put that thing right here on his shoulder, and he had a spittoon on the other side. And get this, he wouldn't spit. He would sit there like this and just wait for it to drool out of his mouth, to hit that, to run out, to run into the spittoon. Now, is that lazy? Is that lazy? But anyway, oh yeah. Gosh, I don't know. Oh, one other kind of funny story was Donnie's brother, Gary, worked out there, and he worked in the blenders. And what I ought to do is just give you a real quick rundown of what the whole operation was. The manganese was mined, like I said, by Isbell. It was trucked in to a dump where there was a great big massive grizzly. And that grizzly was just about the length of the table here, and probably, from here to the chairs wide, with these big bars in between. And what it did was, everything was poured into that grizzly. Any big rocks, boulders, or whatever, there were two guys with jackhammers that would break those boulders apart. And then it would be sent off to the blenders. And these blenders were just big, massive wooden silos, I guess you'd call them, that were upside down. In other words, the bottom of them were circular with an opening in them, and there was about 5 of them, and all depending on how they were doing grade-wise. From the mine, they'd run into some good stuff. They'd put it in, let's say, blender number 2, and then if they ran into some stuff that wasn't so good, grade-wise, maybe in 4, they would blend that ore together before they would start processing it. Well, once that left there on a conveyor belt, it was run over to a rod mill, and run through that rod mill, which was a great big long mill that had these big steel rods in it that turned, and those rods would break that stuff into just absolute fine dust. Then from there, it went through the processing. Once again, those settling ponds that I told you about, and end up in the flotation mill. And by then, it was done, and I don't know the exact chemically way that they did. I know it was a leaching process, but at the end, it ended up in bubbles. These great big bubbles on this table, this massive 100 by 100 foot or whatever it was table, and those bubbles were skimmed off, and that skimming was what we processed, through once again, from there it went to the calcine mill with the guy on with the spittoon, and, from there the nodule and so on and so forth. Gary, Donnie's little brother, was working. He was working at the blender. And at the change room, jobs like that, there were a couple of jobs where the operators going from the day shift to the swing to the graveyard would leave notes for the next engineer or the next operator that was going to run that. And Gary would leave these elaborate, just, classic prose stories on, what he had done and what's next to be done and so on and so forth. He did that for about 3 weeks. And finally, everybody there in the change room, they couldn't stand it any longer. The operator that followed him was illiterate. Couldn't read. So here, all these elaborate notes and everything, it didn't mean a thing. They let Gary do that, like I said, for about 3 weeks running before they finally told him, there's a joke on him. Gosh, I don't know what else.
Rose, you think of something?
Yeah.
You think of something, I'll hand it back.
Okay.
Richard covered most of the stuff a lot of the stuff that I was thinking about, talking about it a little bit. But my memories of the place is well, first of all, it's 61 years ago, and I don't know if I can hardly remember anything. But I remember people and the dirty more than anything else. In fact, if there was anything that motivated me to go to, well, first of all, I was going to Arizona State on a baseball scholarship, so I was fairly well motivated at that time because I thought I was on my way to the major leagues. And I wasn't thinking too much about working. And then I get this summer job, and believe me, motivated me to go back to school. And I said, I'm never going to be back. I'm going to do something. What am I doing? I'm going to be doing something that's good. But anyway, I started that was in the summer of 1958. He mentioned Bill Kendrick, who he worked with at Isbell. Bill was a student at Arizona State also. He was from Boulder City, and we met down there. Arch rivals in high school, became best friends down there. And his dad happened to be in charge of the mine and the mill, and he offered me a summer job, and I needed it, and so I took it. And the first day on the job, and this goes to talk about people that I've met and I've never forgotten. First day on the job, the foreman takes me back to the operator of the kill that Richard's talking about, and his name was Cotton Curl. I didn't know it at the time, but he says, Cotton, this is Don Wilson. He's going to be your helper this summer, blah, 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 and he leaves. And the guy looks at me and he goes, any relation to Don Wilson from Joplin, Missouri? I said, yeah, it was my dad. I'd heard that name before, but I never knew the guy. He and my dad, they were 15 or 16 years old. They hitchhiked from Joplin, Missouri to Idaho to work during the Depression, looking for work. I think my dad had an aunt or a sister or something in Idaho working in the mine. They were both working in mines at that age. So I was telling my dad about it. I said, yeah, I met Cotton Curl. You know him? And he goes, yeah, I know his wife. I told him I met him, and he says, I said, yeah, Dad, he says, you were the best mucker he ever saw. And my dad looked up and he says, yeah, you know, son, he said, that's a hell of a deal. Pick, shovel, wheelbarrow. Didn't take much to do that job, so I remember that one. And the other one operator I was working for was a guy named Bob Henderson. He had tattoos all over his arm. He was an old guy, about 32 or 3 years old. I was about 19, 18 or 19. I was 19. And of course, in 1958, that was only 12, 13 years after the war was over. So I said, hey, where'd you get those tattoos? And he said, dumbass 18-year-old, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, down there in the Army, our airborne school. And I said, no kidding, blah, blah. And he told me some stories, things like that, about his experiences at the post, I guess, because I mentioned to another one of the operators down there, I said, boy, that Bob Henderson's got some stories to tell, don't you? He says, yeah, because you talk about those tattoos and what a dumb move it was. And he says, you know, man, you're talking to a hero. And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, he was one of those devils in baggy pants. And those of you that are old enough, those airborne 101st, 102nd were the ones that went into behind the German lines in World War II. There was 13,000 of them. There was the 101st, 102nd. There was a Polish airborne, airborne from England and France, what was left of France. And the guy that wrote the book, it's published in 1951, and that's it. He got the title, Those Devils in Baggy Pants, from a German officer who had written in his diary, and he was complaining about the hell that he's gone through with those devils in the baggy pants. And that was the title of the guy's book. He didn't talk about the whole war. I mean, the whole outfit. He was talking about the one he was involved with. I looked up Henderson's name in the book. I read the book looking for his name, but he wasn't one of in the same outfit. And lucky for him, because only 3 guys came back out of that unit. That guy was. So it was a slaughter. He was one of the unforgettable characters in my life. And then talking about Richard, he gave you the mine. I mean, the mines where they brought the ore over, and then there was that process all the way to the shipping of it to Akron. Well, I was down at the end with a wheelbarrow, shovel, and a broom. And after it came out of that cooling kiln, it went up a conveyor belt and into a pile, and that's where they loaded it into trucks, hauled it to the railroad head, and shipped it off to Akron, Ohio, or something to that effect. So that was basically my experience of the mine, shoveling, sweeping, and filth. And he really made it sound better at the locker room, because I got up in the morning and put on my go-to-work clothes. When I got to the locker room, I took off the go-to-work clothes, put on the work clothes. And when you come back out, you took off the working clothes, took that Tide shower. That was true. It was terrible. And then you would I put on my go-home clothes, take another shower, and put on your street clothes. It was terrible. My last day was in August of 58, and I was back at Arizona State, and I swear, into September and October, and maybe even into November, sweat, working out, doing anything, still had black on the collars of my shirt. And it was a constant reminder, hit those books, do a little bit better, or you'll be back in those mines. Mark mentioned earlier that it was it's quite common for people that don't really know that a lot of people thought they mined the manganese out here and took it to the plant for the war effort. And as he said, it was magnesium is the plant, manganese was manganese ore. So that was the difference. And a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know it either, but manganese goes back millions of years, back even to the Stone Age, where they used it to color the color you see in those caves. The manganese dioxide is where that coloring came from. The ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans used it to put color in glass and to remove green from glass when there was iron in it. I mean, all kinds of things like that. And it wasn't until about the 16th, the 19th century that they discovered that if you mixed manganese with iron ore, you had steel that was flexible and pliable and stronger than ever. Sorry if I'm losing you on that. So, excuse me. It was at that time. It was well, even today. It's used in the cathodic shielding in the battery industry. It's one of the biggest things that of value to the battery industry, as we all know about batteries. I had a list of some things. It makes steel hard and pliable. It forms magnet alloys. It depolarizes dry cell batteries. It decolors glass made green by iron. It's a powerful oxidant. It's used in some fertilizers and for some grazing of animals. And it's found in foods and multivitamin supplements. So we all use it. It's every place in our life. It's the fifth most. Manganese is the fifth largest amount of minerals in the crust of the earth. And I'm not too sure, Richard touched on it a little bit, that I don't know if we mined out all we had here or just had a higher grade. I know they had a higher grade in Australia. But in 2014, 80% of the manganese that is mined today is mined in South Africa. The other remaining 20% is mined in Australia, Brazil, Gabon, China, and India. That gives you some indication that is how important it is to the world economy. And I guess that's about, I can't think of anything else to say, but be willing to take questions if you need.
One more quick thing to mention. I don't know if anybody's aware of it. Hopefully there is, but right across the street from Manganese Incorporated was just picture, when you're going to the lake, and Manganese Incorporated was on the right side, which is now, I guess, a boat storage place. But on the left side, back up maybe, maybe 500 yards, maybe not even that far, was a town called Manganese Ore. Were any of you, did anybody know that? Hopefully that somebody did. Please. I've been looking for a picture of that forever. I knew, oh, yay. Oh.
But I remember driving to the lake and there being those wooden structures along there. And there were some buildings that were small enough where they were occupied by maybe one person. Building is small enough that it would have a bed, maybe something, and they were very small.
I knew the McMillan family who lived out there in Manganese Ore. One of my classmates, Joe McMillan, went to kindergarten out there at Manganese Ore, and then they moved here into town, lived on Water Street, and he started in the first grade and, went through high school with the rest of us. But I was always hoping that someplace, somewhere, somebody might have a picture of that little town. The good thing about that is be aware that when that town was disassembled or, taken away, they didn't tear out those houses. They didn't tear them down. What they did, they just put them on big trailers and carted them into Pittman. So if you ever get a chance, and you don't know for sure what you're looking at, but get into those old areas like on Jefferson and on Mers and some of those older parts of Pittman. Look at those houses, and if you see some old-time looking house, almost to a shack type of thing, you're probably looking at houses that actually came from Manganese Ore. But if, spread the word, find out if anybody knows of anybody that might have a picture or even, tell the story, lived out there, that type of the thing.
All right, mine's going to be pretty quick. Like he said, we used to go out there in the 70s. I was born here, been here my whole life, and we used to go out and just roam around out there, do things kids do. And on this particular trip, Dad took us out, and like he said, he was writing a screenplay for Vegas. I don't remember that being the case. I just remember him telling us to pose certain places. But so this is, I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's one of the structures out there that we used to run around through. This is how it looks. It does not look like that today. It's all this stuff is down. There's one of this guys in the audience, Chris, aiming at me, shooting. There's my brother and Chris, and then I'm down in the corner. And so that basically is just, I don't know who was Dan Tana. I like to think I was Dan Tana, but I doubt it. I was probably thug number one. But yeah, basically, mine's pretty quick. I thought it was an interesting story and give a perspective of what it was like in the 70s after it was not working anymore. And from a perspective of a kid running through there, it was kind of like heaven to us. We loved going out there. That's the pit. And then there's another pit. I think that's pretty much it. We're going to get to a double one in here.
Is there still a pit out there?
There is still a pit out there, yes. There's actually two pits. There's the one he was calling the hydro tube, which is behind the boat shop, or the storage place, and then around to the left of where the plant was, there's back up in the mountains. There's a huge one. It's just monstrous. But they got signs posted. Yeah, you're not supposed to go out there. I take my life into my hands when I do, but yeah, this is that's pretty much it. It's some of the most vulgar graffiti I ever saw was at that point was out there, and there's a lot of graffiti now, and I think they've got some pictures possibly of modern day. But now they actually get some pretty good artists out there that it's kind of neat to go out for just looking at it. But and I can attest to the dirt. The last time I went out there, the pair of socks I wore was dark for like 3 or 4 weeks, and I finally just had to ditch it. So, but that's pretty much it. That's yeah. It was fascinating to go through there. And as a kid, I was what, 7 years old, 8 years old then. That was pretty cool. So there's our truck. But that's the settling ponds he was talking about right there. And I'm assuming that you would hose things to the center spike, right? And then it would drop down and go. And then all that connected to a big like octagonal building.
Yes.
And then when you go out there, it's pretty deep, and you can actually see where all the tunnels or the caves are coming from, all the settling ponds. And it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it went from there to the flotation mill, like I said.
So I think I'm pretty much done with mine.
At its peak, how many people work there?
At Isbell or or both? I was afraid you were going to ask me that. Isbell, I would say probably 30. The mine, the Three Kids mine part of it, and then the plant, the Manganese Incorporated. Oh gosh, Donnie, help me out. Yeah.
But it was a full function. They had administrative officers. There was clerical people out there. There was a couple of, I guess they were nurses. There was no doctor out there, but they had a medical little clinic out there.
They had a lab.
One time, the medical clinic, it was a chemistry lab. I remember one time I woke up in the morning and my face was swollen I had an abscessed tooth, and it was Saturday. And we worked 6 days weeks out there, and Saturday was a time and a half day, and I was making about $1 an hour, I think. And I had, and I was hurting, and my face, you couldn't hardly see my nose, so swollen. So I head out to, I get to work though, and the guy looks at me, the operator, and he says, "What the hell happened to you?" And I said, "Oh, I got a toothache." And he goes, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I says, "I need that time and a half day." He said, "Go on up to the chemical lab and see Joe or something." I don't even know who it was. And I said, "What for?" He says, "Tell him you need a shot of grain alcohol." I said, "Well, I didn't even drink alcohol. I didn't even drink root beer, let alone alcohol." And I said, "I can't, I don't drink." And he goes, "Just go see Joe." So I go up there. Joe gives me a shot of grain alcohol and tells me to hold it in my mouth. And I did. And I held as long as I could, and it was burning, and it numbed my face for about 10 hours. I worked all day and went home, and And I didn't have a toothache until that night. Another wild story.
So do we have any other questions? Oh, in back?
Yeah, where does the name Three Kids Mine come from?
It's from the three people that found the site. I can't tell you offhand, that somebody else might remember. I don't remember offhand who they were, but it was three people that found the original claim.
It was three miners in 1917.
Yeah, and I don't remember their names.
Back of the AB pit on the hillside there,
Mhm.
you can see the mine holes. Those were the original mine holes. And
Yep.
they named them after their three kids.
No, and there were three of
Three
them.
miners
Yeah.
named them after their three kids.
Yeah. And I knew the names, I'm blanking on them right now. I'm sorry to say. But, and the community that Richard noted, Rick pulled up an article from 1952 that talked about they were reopening the mine at that point. And it's interesting, in that article, it talked about that there was housing at the mine in 1917, 1918, when it was open for World War I. That housing was gone. There was housing at the mine that would have been the community out there in World War II. The thing is, if you think about it, today we think of, it's easy to drive out to the Three Kids mine. When we're talking about even World War I, World War II, or the 50s, that was a trek out there. You know, so if you had people working out there on those kinds of shifts, you had housing out there. And there was a community out there. And it was housing for the mine. And so there was a community there.
Yeah, one of the articles said that there were 500 men employed to build the mill. When in the First World War phase of the Three Kids mine, all they did was haul ore out. They had a tractor that hauled ore across the desert and out to the railway station. But then at the start of the Second World War, they had to have a mill because they now had water and power that had been put in to supply the magnesium plant, the BMI plant in Henderson. So they had what they needed to run a first-class mill. And you can just see from the leftovers that Mike showed you what a massive outfit that had to be. That's a lot of concrete that was poured in. You see other pictures, you see all the sheds and things.
Yep.
So they had 500 people that were there building all of that. And during that period of time, for sure, they would have had kids and would have had to have been in school.
And I would point out, when we're talking about World War I, remember, there was no railroad in Henderson. There was no Henderson in Henderson. When they're talking about hauling the ore out of the Three Kids mine site, they're talking about hauling it all the way to Las Vegas in order to hook up with the railroad, or perhaps hauling it all the way, say, to Arden, or all the way to Jean, which was probably where they were actually taking it, was to Jean. So taking it all the way from Three Kids out to Jean in order to hook up with the railroad. So if you can imagine running a tractor that far hauling the ore in World War I. Because what they would do in World War I is they would just dump the ore in large piles at Jean, and they had it literally right along the railroad. They did the same thing with the ore that was coming out of the Yellow Pine mining district. All the zinc, all the lead, all of that was coming out of Mount Potosi and out of Good Springs and out of Sandy Valley. That was coming down. And by the way, you were talking about how they shut down the mine in 1961. The federal government did exactly the same thing at the end of World War I. All the contracts that they had, not just for ore, not just for metals, but for agricultural products and everything else, as soon as the war was over, they canceled every contract. Didn't matter what you had signed with the federal government, they canceled all of those contracts immediately. And I can't tell you how many companies went out of business all the way across the United States because the federal government said, war's over, we don't need it anymore. Didn't matter. Didn't matter what the government had signed with you. You were just out of luck.
Mark?
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. Did you know of Fritz McGonigal?
No.
Well,
Yep.
was there a Fritz McGonigal involved with this whole thing? At one time, now I'm talking about a roadway that was built by this Fritz McGonigal from Henderson clear over to the LA highway. And that reminded me, because he was back in Washington, Washington DC, at the same time that I had gone there because of some situation that we had.
Yeah.
And I recall that he had such an effect between a roadway clear over to the highway, that LA highway.
Was he going out towards Jean?
That's right.
Oh, so he was going around that side. Well, that was going to be a back route. Yeah.
Really, I tell you what, it wasn't Henderson that built that roadway, but it was Fritz McGonigal, and that's the way I understood it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that was a clear thing.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to go all the way to Las Vegas to get out on the highway. He had quite a deal with that situation, but
That's possible.
It just reminded me of
Yeah,
Fritz.
there's nothing.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I don't want to get into, I'm sorry, but got into other things. Anybody else on the three kids' mine? I mean, these guys know more about that than I do. Yes, ma'am.
I was not a question or anything, but I know some of us here had family who worked at the plant. My mother worked in the lab, lab technician. Jackie's dad was what, a foreman? Superintendent. And we lived in Manganese Park. They built the homes for the employees, and they were nice
Oh, yeah.
cinder block homes, you know. And I
Yeah.
don't know if anyone else here had relatives who worked there or anything.
Oh, I think quite a few people did. Yeah, I've met a lot of folks that work there.
It was in the early 50s.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I was curious, doing my homework preparing for tonight's meeting, I read that inhaling manganese can cause neurological problems. Did they provide any kind of mask or
We
dust?
have no. And you know how dirty it is out there now? You know, when you drive out there, you still see how black the mountain is? It used to be black.
Yeah.
I mean, after 50 years or 60, however long it's been, with the weather and the rain. John,
Yeah.
what I do remember though, John, people did wear like a mask that, like a handkerchief tied around. They wet them down, keep that stuff could penetrate a dry rag.
Explains some things.
I remember every now and then the lazy guy that I told you about that ran the calcine mill. He wouldn't completely roast the ore, so when it finally hit the nodule kiln, it was still wet. So the nodule kiln turned into a roasting, turned into the calcine kiln. So instead of it being nods, when it got to me on the cooler kiln, it was just the dust, it was the calcine. So, and it fell down into this pit that was probably about 15 feet deep, concrete all the way around, onto that conveyor, like I told you, that had those troughs in it. When that happened, the troughs wouldn't pick that dust up like it was supposed to, so therefore it fell down onto the bottom of the floor. When that happened, I had to get down there with a square point shovel and shovel that hundreds of degree calcined dust into those troughs, because if you didn't, you'd just fill up that pit. And, you're talking 115, minimum 115, more than that, because remember, if it was 115 here, out there with all that manganese, that black manganese, it was just a magnet to all that heat from the sun. So Lord knows how hot it was. Well, couple that with getting down there 15 feet around that calcined dust. I remember one time that I did it, and of course, it didn't burn the soles of my shoes off, but it just turned them into parchment. After the shift was over with, and the next day I tried to put those shoes on, and the soles just crumpled.
I'm not sure exactly how it works, but in those kilns out there also, there was a job related to that. It was a laborer's type job. I didn't have to do it, but where Richard's talking about having to get down in it, they had slag, the stuff that was left over from whenever they were spinning it out. Somebody had to get down there and clean that out and haul it, and then throw it in the truck and haul it out in a tailing pile. So if you drive out there today and you're going to the lake, up near that boat shop, you see all that tailing piles, that stuff out there. That's stuff that's all byproduct of that manganese ore stuff. And I mean, there must be 1 million tons of that stuff out there right now. So it's.
So it wasn't combustible. There wasn't any chance of.
Other than the heat from the kilns, yeah.
The one thing that I remember, a lot of those concrete pilings that you saw in those photographs, I guess probably one of those times either a new type of processing or whatever have you had transpired between probably the first time that Manganese Incorporated was run back at the First World War as compared to when we were there. They built over a lot of that stuff, those concrete pilings and everything else. There were areas, especially in the front part of that, where those concrete pilings were, there were not tunnels, but just layers of areas that were pure concrete. And the water table is so high, so close to the surface, that a lot of those areas would seep full of water. So picture once again at least 115 degrees in the summertime, and then here you've got these big concrete overhangs with water underneath them. Just an absolute oasis type of a thing. The only problem is that every snake in Clark County, every rattlesnake ended up in there waiting for the rabbits and whatever have you to come there. That was an area that you stayed away from, You just did.
Forgot about that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is anything still visible? Any of the structures, or were they destroyed, or?
I don't know if it was in the 90s or the 80s. They dynamited the structures that I had on those pictures. Right now, there's foundations. The settling ponds are still there. But the big building and all that concrete, it was all dynamited at some point.
And you said 2 of the pits are still quite visible.
The second one, it takes a while to get to.
3? Well, there are 4 altogether, I believe.
I've only seen 2.
Yeah, but
2 of them.
but Richard said at one point there were 4 altogether out there, but there are 2 that are still visible out there.
There's the A pit, the B pit. The A pit, A pit, I think, was the big one. That was the money one, and that one, I think, lasted who knows how long. Then the B pit, which had good ore to the point where we did actually mine a little bit out of that B pit. But the main thing that we were doing, the hydro pit was done. It was, you know, it was toast. But then the new pit, I call the new pit, that was that narrow, deep one that is still out there that you can see. Yeah, when I was there, they didn't even have a name for it. So, you know, it wasn't even a pit yet. It was just open desert. We were just starting to dig the thing out. But yeah, there were 4 pits, A, B. The A pit was filled in a lot, I think, from the B pit and maybe even the hydro pit. I don't know that for a fact, but the B pit for sure. But like I said, we did actually do a little bit of mining out of that B pit, and then that new pit, that whatever you said the name of it was.
Pit?
Hulin.
Hulin, okay. So there's, what, 2 pits that are still visible out there? That are,
No, there's 3.
there are 3, okay.
The AB is now basically one pit.
Oh, okay.
All the AB pits. And that's
Okay.
what he's referring to. You can see where parts of it have broken down and fallen in.
Okay,
And then you have the hydro pit,
right,
and then the Hulin pit, which is further west,
okay.
further back up against the mountain.
So those are still out there, and then you've got just the foundations and not a lot of uprights still out there.
The ponds are still there, and some of them have pretty high walls. And the spire structures in the center are starting to crumble on some of them, but yeah, it's,
That hillside that you see if you're standing at the entrance to Lake Las Vegas and you look south, that hillside is a dam. It's about some places as much as 80 feet deep, and it is filled with tailings from the processing of the plant. There was a part that broke through the dam and spread a little bit further west. And you can tell that. And you go out and see, I mean, you can tell that this is all manganese.
Who owns it and who was responsible for cleaning it up?
At this point, I think it's federal, isn't it?
A portion of it is.
Yeah,
There's 300 and some acres that are owned by a private party that bought them at auction. They bought
Yep.
those mining claims that basically made up the pit. But for instance, the hydro pit has private ownership and public ownership from the right to the middle of it.
yeah. And as I understand it, at this point, there's a group that's looking to acquire all of it and mitigate it and build out there. Yeah. Everybody's got their own. Yeah,
Is it posted or can you go hiking out there now?
it's posted. Some people read the posts, some people don't. I would not suggest it, but not everyone listens. I know, having spoken to some of the members of the audience, that not everyone listens. Any other questions? And I just have to ask, were you involved with the mine?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm old enough, but I wasn't.
That's all right.
Smart enough.
Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you all for coming. Thanks to our panel. It's fascinating. And be sure to be looking for, when we get back together in either September or October, for our next Henderson Speaks.